Go for it.
That's great, thank you. And thanks, Paul, just for that welcome and setting the scene. So yeah, my name's Mel Hughes. Sorry, Chris, do you want to move on to the next slide? There we go. So yeah, I'm Mel Hughes, and I've been asked just to set the scene a little bit really about what we mean by the inclusive research agenda. So just by way of introductions for anybody that wasn't part of webinar 1, I'm based at Bournemouth University. I'm a professor of social work, but have a number of roles within these different centres. But essentially, it's about applying our research to real world challenges to have maximum societal impact and engaging with marginalised communities in order to do that. And that's why we've been part of this series of webinars and the projects that we're going to be focusing on and highlighting today around how we do inclusive research on the ground. We start with that question, what is the inclusive research agenda? And in its broader sense, it's simply this: it's the need to ensure that research findings apply to everyone. And that's kind of one of the definitions set down by NIHR, which is essentially the research arm of the NHS. And I'm going to be pulling out a few of their kind of examples today. No, that's fine, you can move on. A few of their examples just in this scene setting bit around where they're setting the inclusive research agenda. Chris, yeah. So webinar 1, we asked what is research, and we talked about how it's seeking deeper understanding and insights, it's gathering and studying information, testing ideas and new approaches or interventions, verifying available knowledge. But if we just move on to the next slide, what the inclusive research agenda is really questioning that. So seeking deeper understanding and insights from who? Gathering and studying information about what? Testing ideas and new approaches with who, by who, for who. And when we're looking at research that's verifying available knowledge, well, who's generated that knowledge? Who's contributed to that knowledge? So the inclusive research agenda is about really asking those questions to make sure that our research is of benefit to everybody. We know that it's not currently, that there are real inequalities in research, and that lots of research is actually reinforcing health and social inequalities rather than addressing them. Quote here from NIHR, looking specifically at clinical trials, so one of the types of health research. If patients in clinical trials do not represent the whole community, there is a risk that differences in drug metabolism, side effect profiles and outcomes will be missed. Ethnic subgroups are most often underrepresented in clinical trials. Sorry, there's something weird happening with the slides here with a bit of repetition. This is a problem. So if we're not involving a diverse range of people in research at all the different stages, then that's going to lead to skewed data, missed information, less effective, low quality interventions for some communities, underdiagnosis, undertreatment, lack of understanding, poor outcomes for minority groups, those currently underserved by research, and it's going to reinforce health and social inequalities. There's some slides that I'm sharing here. I'm not going to read them all out, but I've put them there for context, and you're very welcome to kind of go back, look at the links and look in the detail. But NIHR did some work in the Include project where they actually looked at that term, communities underserved by research, to look at, well, who is it that's not participating or not involved or in research? And the list was vast. Actually, it was probably most people are not. But they kind of drew out this kind of list in terms of people that are most affected by particular health not being reflected, or certain demographics not being reflected. I'm just going to fly through the next few slides, Chris, if that's okay. They grouped that in terms of demographic factors. So there's a list there of who by age, sex, ethnicity, education are not typically engaging in research, both informing, shaping and participating in research. Next one was about social and economic factors. So people, again, not typically engaging from these different backgrounds. It's interesting when you look at it, isn't it? It's people in full-time employment and people who are unemployed. So we're talking the majority of people here. Next one was Groups by health status, so lots of people with particular kind of health conditions, including long-term health, mental health, physical health, people who are disabled, pregnant women. These are all groups of people that are not typically engaging in research. So if we think about how we're developing research and whether we're developing research that benefits everybody, we're not. And next slide, please. And then this is the final one of particularly anybody with any rare conditions and rare disease subtypes, again, not involved typically in research. So this is a problem. If we I've pulled out 3 examples here, but as you're listening, there's probably all sorts of examples that you're thinking of in your mind that are particularly relevant to the groups and communities that you're working with within your voluntary sector, where you're very aware of the impact of of inequalities in research. I've pulled out 3 examples that immediately came to my mind. The first one was a really kind of recent one around kind of COVID and the pandemic. And I don't know if you remember in the early stages, one of the symptoms we were all asked to look out for was a rash, a particular kind of skin rash. And photos and guidance were sent out to all kind of medics, hospitals, GPs and so on around how to kind of recognise a rash that was associated with COVID. All the pictures were on white skin. And actually, there's been a whole lot of studies, particularly in dermatology, realizing that actually a lot of guidance and around pictures and images are often on white skin. And there's evidence now that that's led to misdiagnosis of COVID, but also more widely of things like Lyme disease, spider bites, cancers in patients of colour. And there's quite a lot of evidence of that because of not having that involvement and that representation. A second one I picked up was assessment tools for diagnosing ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Some of you would be very familiar with this. For a long time, it was considered that autism was mainly affected boys and men. In fact, it was boys. It was particularly focusing on childhood. So all the research was done on boys, and then the assessment tools were developed based on that research with boys. Even now, on the kind of diagnosing questionnaire, one of the questions is, does your child have intense interest, for example, in aeroplanes, trains, and cars? This is a problem. So as many as 80% of autistic girls and women are diagnosed by the age of 18. So we know now there's a real push to kind of address research to redress that balance. There's a lot of research being undertaken now around autism in girls and women and how that might present differently. For example, intense interest may be missed because it's on boy bands or musicians or artists, and that's not picked up as much as when it's seen as something that's more traditionally associated with boys. And then the final example I've pulled out is around digital access to healthcare. Lots of research, lots of service improvement projects, lots of work where we look at how people access healthcare, all social care, and engage with services, all with treatment. But if we've not got a wide range of people informing those discussions, informing those plans, then it can often kind of exclude people. So there's a particular example here around evidence that the digital front door is further excluding people from healthcare, for example. So again, if you remember, those of you that attended webinar 1, we talked about different methods, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but think about the kind of who is it that's participating in clinical trials or focus groups or interviews. What the inclusive research agenda involves is questioning who those participants are and then taking very active steps in ensuring that a more diverse range of voices, specifically those currently underserved by research, are involved. And that involves changing the way we do things, really, to make sure that they are inclusive and reaching the people that we want to reach. When we think about involvement, we're looking at 3 key areas when we're talking about the inclusive research agenda. So it's by increasing the diversity of who participates in research. So research participants, the people filling out the questionnaires, undertaking the surveys, being part of clinical trials. It's increasing the diversity of who designs research, so public contributors, patient advisory groups, co-applicants, so people with lived experience of the topic being explored, actually being supporting and directing research. And then finally, it's looking at the diversity of who conducts research. So there's quite a lot of work going on now around the research workforce and how we need to make that much more diverse. Interestingly, the big research funders in health and social care are absolutely on this. So just again, one example from NIHR is they made it a requirement from this month in all of their funding applications for people applying for research funding to show how they will address existing inequalities in health and social care as a condition of that funding. And of their diagram, I think 2 and 5 are really important for this webinar. So they're committed, they're kind of in their kind of new work around widening access and participation for greater diversity and inclusion. And number 5, collaborating with partners for impact and sustainability. So there's a role there for all of us in that work. There's a challenge though, isn't it? Increasing diversity of who is involved in research doesn't just happen. We need to understand and address the root causes of low involvement rates by some communities. And we know that many opportunities currently to be involved or participate in research are just too formal, too rigid, and as such out of reach of many. So this is where you come in. So just final couple of slides. We're going to be really thinking today about the role of the voluntary and community sector and exploring this more in the face-to-face workshops that we've got coming up. So this involves developing more inclusive approaches and flexible ways of working to involve people who are currently excluded. We need to collaborate with community partners and develop the resources and infrastructure to enable you to do that. And from our point of view, voluntary community sector organisations are best placed to drive this change. What does this need to look like? And then I think just final slide, Chris, because we're going to focus part of the webinar today on looking at what we've been learning from our REN project. So the I Am More Than, again, that we introduced in webinar 1. Those who are there will know that we're currently in phase 3, which is building wider VCS capacity and capability to engage in research and extend the approach to wider groups at risk of exclusion. So thank you, Chris. Paul, back to you. And just apologies for the slides there. I think the format had all changed as they'd been sort of embedded into this block. So there was some odd wording going on there, I think, but hopefully they were clear.
Yeah, apologies there, Mel. Mel, really nice segue into the section with Kate. So with that, it's a pleasure to introduce Kate Jupp from Bournemouth University. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Kev and Jim, are you going to pop your cameras on as well at this point? That'd be great if you want to join us. So we have just heard from Mel about the new inclusive research agenda, and what we'd like to do in this next section is share an example of how research can be inclusive from a project involving the 2 different community organisations that Paul has referred to already, the pioneers of this approach. So that's the Lantern Trust and the Health Bus. The project aims to better understand how members of the homeless community would like to be involved in research, and we'll hear how each community organisation have worked alongside the communities they serve to design and support involvement that really is inclusive. The name of the project comes from the inclusive approach. In initial conversations, someone shared, if I'm going to be involved in research, you need to understand who I am, that I am more than just homeless. And Bells, I'll hand over to you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Kate. Yes, this idea coincided with something else that I've been thinking around about people not just being one thing. I mean, I'm not just a mother and nobody is just homeless. I was aware that if I wanted to try and engage with people and understand a bit more about who they were, that I sort of needed something portable that worked with how we work. We're mobile, we don't have a particular base, and I needed to make sure I could kind of just sit with people and understand a bit more about them. So I bought some small canvases and I did an example of who I am. Chris, I don't know if you've got the slides there. This isn't mine. But one of the first people to contribute to one of the canvases was a 23-year-old man He's a brother, son, and a father. He put on his slide. He said he didn't really know what to write, and I said, "Well, what who do you feel that you are, and what do you like, and what did you want to be?" When he ran out of ideas, and he'd said he was a football lover. He was kind. His dream job was to be a forensic psychologist. And within the same week, there was another gentleman completed one, and you can see he says he's 58 years old and homeless, but he likes snooker. That's just dropped off the bottom. You can see that at the bottom here. And I just thought already that sort of the diversity of the community that we were working with was already sort of coming through, even just with those few there. One thing I did struggle with was sort of try not to over-engineer people's thoughts with my own ideas. I'd done my I am as an example, but I didn't want that to be too prescriptive. And for some people, they wanted to write poetry, they did some art, or they wanted to tell their story in a different way. And I just wanted to make sure that I kind of captured that where I could. Chris, there's a couple of examples there. So you can see one thing that came through with people who had very little saying how happy they were. So on the one that there, it says, "I'm happy" at the top. It says, "If you don't leave your past in the past, it will destroy your future. Live for what today has to offer, not what yesterday has taken away." And then another beautiful poem by another gentleman. So it was really just trying to say to people that it was important to be heard and that they mattered, and whatever way they wanted to present that was fine. Something else that came through was sort of checking myself for my assumptions, I think. There was one gentleman, Tim. I assumed he wouldn't be keen to participate. He seemed a bit busier. And I was wrong. He became one of my key partners in the first stage of the project with us all, and ended up presenting and telling his story at the first event. He'd also made assumptions because he thought he'd be able to tell his story easily. He'd told it many times and seemed quite confident. But I think what he hadn't accounted for was that he was telling it this time just to be heard as an individual, as Tim, and just to be known for him rather than because it was a means to an end or filling in paperwork or something like that. At the time he was housed, and rather than sort of giving him vouchers for his time, we ended up getting a long-handled dustpan and brush. So again, it was nice to be able to keep that kind of flexibility and do something that was meaningful for him. And I should add that right at the beginning of the project, we wanted to ensure that people's time was compensated and they knew that their time was as valuable as mine. So we were all working together. He did an amazing presentation, and I think everybody in the room was very moved. And Tim died last year, sadly, but he and his story had a great impact on those involved in the project, and I think we all miss him. Next slide, please. Whilst many people did art or wrote words, I'd not anticipated how many people would have challenges with their literacy. We had a wonderful morning one time. I know about 10 people sitting doing I ams, and amongst them was a gentleman who English wasn't his first language, but he was helping another guy who'd just been released from prison to write his. There were lots of jokes about who was doing what people's interests were. And so I think it added more value than just the value I was getting from the research project, because it kind of created a community within a community. And it was lovely hearing people laughing and sharing their stories and telling their stories just for learning more about them. One that particularly struck me was a lady who said she wanted her voice to be heard, but she couldn't read or write. And I asked if I could write that for her. So that's that. Yeah. Kate, you're muted.
Thanks, Bells. That last canvas there is a really powerful example how you and those that you've worked alongside at the Health Bus have made your approach really inclusive, and also highlighted the wider benefits that this has brought to everyone involved. We'll just let that siren pass. Yeah. I wonder, just in the last minute or so that we've got for this section here, if you could give, so you've shared some of those canvases really nicely. I wonder if you can give a little taste of where you were, where people were contributing these canvases.
So I think we, at the time, we had a very small area outside the YMCA, little room. So often our conversations had to take place outside. I'd buy sausage rolls and we'd sit and we'd have a chat. And obviously that was a nice way to engage with people, to sitting with them rather than asking them, somebody to do something for me. It was very much about us working together. What could I learn from somebody else? And I think I mentioned in the last one that I was struggled that I might not have. I kind of felt that I was almost too privileged, or there would be some kind of block, and actually it wasn't like that at all. And it, you know, we built some really lovely relationships sitting on the street together, having a sausage roll, chatting about who people were. Some of the IAMs were sad because of the mood that people were in, but that equally, that spoke volumes too, with people saying what they were struggling with at the time. And there's some quite rude ones which I won't share. But again, happy, but just interesting language about, and obviously very personal, and I didn't want to share people's names, but some really lovely insights into who people are and the diversity of the homeless community and those people who are vulnerably housed or have experienced it. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, Bells. And that, again, really highlighting that inclusive approach, that some of the canvases were created on the street outside the YMCA, some in people's bedsits and where they were, others in cafes, and just that really flexible approach to broaden who was able to be involved.
Yes, some are even by people's tents, just with some colouring pens and just sitting, chatting. And it was a lovely way to engage and have just a normal conversation with somebody, rather than it being always about their health or, well, you know, their mental health or physical health. So it added an extra layer of comfort to all of our relationships, I think.
Yeah, and that really highlights the wider benefits that being involved in research has. It's benefited the research, but it's benefited, you know, the community and the Health Bus as well. So brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much, Beth.
Thanks.
Tanya, Jim and Kevin, over to you to hear how the Lantern Trust has designed their approach to be inclusive. Tanya.
Thanks, Kate. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, if you wasn't here last week, I'm Tanya. I work at the Lantern Trust, which we're based in Weymouth. My particular work with people who are either homeless or vulnerably housed. So I'm funded through the Rough Sleepers Initiative, and it's all about really just engaging people with different activities, and that's pathways to education, training and employment, and we do that in hopefully a nice creative way. One of those groups that I do run is a creative writing group. So from that, we were able to gather people together and offer the opportunity of this project to become community researchers. And we had 4 community researchers who took up that opportunity, and it's just, I'm really glad that Jim and Kev, who are 2 of our community researchers, can join today. And so we were just going to do like a little mini Q&A to kind of just share some sort of experiences from their perspective of how the project's gone. So I'm going to go into that first question. So if I come to you first, Jim. So the question is, in what ways do you feel that the project has supported you to be involved from the beginning? If you can maybe just share a couple of examples. Thank you.
Yeah, from the beginning, I found the whole project quite challenging. I've in a past life I've worked as a project manager, so the whole notion of not having a specific set objective, kind of, I found that quite challenging. But initially, Tanya organised events which got people in, so we could start speaking to them. I think we decided quite quickly that I guess we were going to interview people and record what they were saying in some way or another. But yeah, how was I supported? I think those events kind of gave me a better feel of what we were gunning for and what was required. And gradually, as the project progressed into phase 2, I started coming up with my own ideas for generating leads. Sorry, very commercial sort of language, but that's kind of how I think of it. To get more stories in, to speak to more people, engage with more people, and yeah, I think the regular meetings that we've had as a research team and the regular events that we've had just kind of helped cement the idea of what I was doing and how I could contribute a lot better.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So it really sort of showed, yeah, that sort of felt a bit unstructured, didn't it, at first? So we was really just going with the flow of that journey. And then, you know, you were really just running with it on the ground. And I think as time went by, as you said, we held events. So we were kind of just learning as we went on, and then you like gaining that confidence. And the thing is, you did outreach to so many people who shared their stories with you. So that was fantastic. Thanks, Jim. Kev,
could add one thing, sorry,
yeah,
which is that I had a really black view of the whole project to start off with. We're talking about a delivery by March when we're starting out in mid-November. I was like, this is never going to fly. So, you know, I was reassured. Sorry.
Fine, that's great. Thanks. Kev, what's your perspective on that question?
Did
you want me to repeat it?
No, I have the question in front of me, don't worry. I'm just gathering my thoughts. Sorry, it's the typical neurodiversity thing. I just need to pause before I answer. First off, I think it was the encouragement. We're in it together. We don't really know what's demanded of us from the project. I think we all agree on that. We didn't know what direction this was. My original thought was, I think, very similar to Jim's, in that this would be a data gathering exercise, but it turned out not to be, and therefore that was rather confusing for me. But then we started to sit around doing some brainstorming sessions, which Tanya organised. We would roll out a very large piece of paper on the table and add our thoughts to it as a pool of thoughts. We would explore different ways of representing some of the issues that we felt needed to be raised, which was anything from I think Jim tackled this one, which was the process that people went through to try and apply for housing and so on. It was our own freedom, though, to express how we were given that choice and that freedom to express our own research. We were provided with materials, advice and equipment in the form of cameras and whatever we needed, paperwork, notepads, whatever we needed. Sometimes we were given excuse me, my brain's just gone a bit dumb here. Vouchers to encourage other people or to thank other people after they'd taken the time out. Access to other sites. I was given access to the bus stop to do my interviews, which Tanya arranged for me. She also provided practice sessions for us. We did dry runs, ready for the pool presentation, the first part of this, and we were showcased later on to the society members and whatever other groups and charities within Weymouth, which is encouraging because we get the moral support from and we were also provided with transport to get to and from events as we needed it. So that's how I answer that question. Sorry.
That's a beautiful summary. Thanks, Kevin. You've just reminded me of that whole timeline of actually how we worked as a team to support that, and just highlighting things like the resources and being able to express yourself, and also just sharing, you know, what all of our individual skills and needs are, and how we adapted around that. That's fantastic. So thank you very much. So back to you, Jim, just for the last question. So can you maybe just explain in your own words about how your involvement as a community researcher was unique to you?
Yeah, I think it developed my knowledge and understanding of a number of things, not least I think a fairly ingrained attitude and opinion towards homelessness, in spite of having been homeless myself more than once, in fact. You know, this is essentially an example of how not to be. You know, you don't want to do it. Talking to so many people about their experiences really brought it home to me that it's not a choice and it's not a fault thing. You know, a handful of shitty things can happen to anybody, and you know, I don't know how much money you've got in the bank, but I certainly can't last 2 months or probably even 1 month. You know, enough dire things happening to someone can put them in a really bad situation. I think that was a valuable realization for me. But also that you know, I've kind of built my social network out of this. Some of the people that I've interviewed, we've got on well with, and they've become friends. Yeah, I think that it was I'm not sure, unique is not a word I like, to be honest, but yeah, it was a powerful experience for me. I would have to say that.
Thank you, Jim. It's really like reflective the way you've shared all that, and certainly having observed your journey, there is so much I feel that that you have done around this. So thank you for all your contributions. So just got one minute left, Kev, if you don't mind, just explaining about your what was unique to you being a community researcher. Thank you.
Being a neurodiverse person, this was rather challenging for me because it meant I had to come out of my own comfort zone. But I could apply my analytical mind, I thought, but it wasn't. It became a creative process. It was a chance to give voice to a lot of thoughts and feelings, to step away from a database research, to use my lived experience and help connect with other people in particular ways that only I could do, or people that travel a similar path to me. The particular challenges of neurodiversity was the creativity, communications, and social, the stress, managing the stress of it all, particularly managing being overwhelmed with public speaking, public engagements, and the lack of routine, because this can be rather chaotic sometimes. But it was a chance to bring humanity to the whole problem of homelessness. And what I've got from this is being involved is also socializing, bringing me out of my shell a little bit, and meeting other people like Jim and Tanya and everything, and being involved in this, including today.
Thank you, Kev, and thank you both for just sharing, your true experience there. Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Wow, thank you all so much for sharing such fabulous insights about what inclusive involvement has meant from your individual perspectives. And you've really highlighted the importance, I think, through each of your individual conversations about a relationship first approach with the community organisation that's supporting you and you are a part of, and the communities that you are reaching out to, and just how important flexibility has been. So thank you, Tanya, Bells, Jim and Kev, and over to you, Paul.
Thank you all very much. That was incredibly powerful and very insightful. Chris, at this point, I wonder if we could stop the recording.